are now broadcasting, so I'm hoping that this is hitting you at 100 miles an hour. And I just want to start by saying a massive welcome to everyone who has joined our webinar today. For what is the third week of webinars that we have been running as part of our sort of Real Schools commitment to providing support to you and to your school community. Webinar number 15, and I guess today it probably feels a little bit different. It might feels a little bit different. It's hard to ignore the reality, one, what's going on around us, but two, it is Good Friday. And I sort of want to really make a special mention to people that have made the effort to come in today. And I hope you find this next sort of 45 minutes to an hour quite rewarding. Also a bit of a shout out there, and I haven't had a look as people are starting to join the room. I'm just quickly going through our attendees now. Yeah, look, a couple of people there that joined us last night for our trivia night. And what a great night we had. I'm sure you would have seen it somewhere around the Facebook posts over the course of the last week. But it really was a great way just to get together and connect with teachers from all over Australia. But not only Australia, I think we actually extended that reach a little bit broader than that. So to any teachers who are backing up today, thank you. And it's a massive effort. Adam and I were just talking earlier today, and it sort of feels like the backside of a school concert that we had last night. So hopefully today you find it a good way to set up for what's going to be a really enjoyable weekend for you. I know from my personal point of view, I'm really excited. Once we step out of here, my kids are itching to go camping in the backyard as we sort of sit in isolation there. So I'm sure in your own way, you'll be all doing your own things for Easter. Look, just around the control panel here, I just want to touch on that quickly. What you'll find somewhere sitting around your screen is the ability to be able to open a chat box. What we would like to do is use that chat box as a way of sharing one, conversation, but two, any feedback that you may have for me. It's important, you've got other functions on there. I think if you go, what's the most important function? It is the chat box. So if you'd just like to open up that chat box there are a couple of options. You've got all panelists, but you've also got everyone in the meeting, or all panelists and attendees. What I'm going to do is just a quick check-in. Just give me one word, how you're feeling, how things are traveling for you. You know, what's the feeling in terms of your personal world at the moment? Just give me something that shows that one, you're connecting, and two, you can hear me, and we'll go from there. Full hot cross buns. Oh yeah, great. Tired. I'm hearing, yeah, Joe, fair enough. I'll try and give you a bit of inspiration through this morning. All good, Kathy, that's good to hear. Excited. I love that one, excited. Yeah, lots of sleep. Oh, cool. Thank you for checking in. We do have a number of people who I know have signed up for this webinar who will be looking to grab it at a later stage. So when it comes to that point that you're watching this webinar, I hope that you certainly get something out of it. And why I mention that, it's really important. What we're going to talk about today, I think it serves us today, it serves us now, it serves us next week. But there's also an element of this webinar that will help us when we return to normality. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is at the end, you'll get the slide deck and you'll get a link to the webinar. I think it would be worthwhile, if this is of any value to you, saving that link and saying, I want to share this, I want to look at this again when we get close to returning to what we consider to be a normal classroom environment. Because when we set this webinar up, we didn't know what school shutdown was going to look like. We didn't know how long we would be out of action for. Now we've got a bit more clarity on that. It probably is a little bit premature in some ways to be talking about re-establishing boundaries, but there'll be hopefully things that will serve you there. Rebecca, feeling relaxed. That's probably the best way for me to be able to move into that next slide. But before I do that, I guess probably, why is this topic so important? It's right. The why for me is because the goalposts have changed. When our students walked into our classroom on day one of this year, expecting a fun, exciting, fulfilling, engaging year, we didn't know that some 10 or 11 weeks later, there would be this massive disruption. And the key word on that title slide for me is re-establish, because I'm going to come from a position that you have already, in term one, in the 10 weeks that you've been working with your student, established the expectations, the boundaries that you wanted, the things that make your classroom so fulfilling. And now we've got to go back to that re-establishing. And I want to talk a little bit more about that as we unfold today's webinar. So let's go to slide number one. And this really is the picture for me of how so many teachers across Australia would be feeling. And I sit and I look at the facial expressions on this young teacher here, and I sort of think, what is it? Is it, it's that element of concern that we've got. There's also that, feeling of emptiness. Maybe an absence of purpose is something, we started and our jobs, we have so much purpose in our day-to-day lives when we're in classrooms, but maybe we feel like that's a bit of a loss. And I think if nothing else, for that, facial expression, it tells me that this lady's missing her kids. And I'm sure that that's how we all feel, especially our most vulnerable kids, the kids that we're sending home to families that we're not too sure how they're actually tracking. The sort of care that we provide them in the school environment, is that there? The reality is, but as a teacher, this is part of our normal day. Those emotions that I've just mentioned before would happen every single day of our lives, but it's just in a different environment. And if anything, it's significantly increased, I think, over the course of the last 8 to 10 weeks. Probably now, I think we're starting to head into a different phase, and we'll talk a little bit about that as this unfolds. But it's that uncertainty, I guess, that's probably played on our minds. Just want to point you into the direction of a great article that Amy Green, one of our team members, she put together yesterday. I'm sure it'll hit the Facebook blog at some stage, or the post some stage today. And it's about getting excited again to get back into the classroom. So I think that if you can take that and when you find it and just share that with your teachers, it's a great little read there. And it really talks about getting that inspiration and that excitement back into our lives, because we do have a little bit more certainty around what next stages are going to look like. And I can't help but also think when I look at this slide here that, for me, I'm living in a house at the moment with my wife, who's a teacher, and my 4 kids are also absent from their school. So the reality of that feeling is so close to my home. And I think, it's those experiences that sometimes sharpen our ability to be able to reflect on what's going on around Australian schools. And again, I talk about pictures that are probably a familiar sight across Australia, and there is nothing more than this picture that probably tells me that, as we know, pictures of these classrooms will be everywhere across Australia. Yes, I am referring to the classrooms being empty, but really for me, it's about the fact that they've been set up and that we've walked away from them. We've had to step away from them. There's things that I don't love about this classroom. I'll point them out now and I'll get them off my chest. First of all, teacher's desk in the corner. It's set up like it's sort of like a place to go. The other thing is there, I guess probably we talk about that as we get into it a little bit later on, but some of the stuff around the room, I think a little bit difficult to read, but I think on that back room there, class rules, again, we'll sort of unpack and poke some sticks at that a little bit later on. But really, term 1 is about setting up. And then what we do is, I guess we look forward to term 2. And I go back to my time in the classroom. And I love term 2 because I'd set the expectations up. There are so many disruptions. But then term 2 was about learning. I'd molded the students. I had them working the way that I wanted to work. I was working with them in terms of being able to provide the support that was targeted for their needs. So what we need to do is we need to go back and we need to revisit that. We need to ensure that re-establishment of those norms and expectations is right where we want it to be. I'm going to ask at a certain stage throughout this webinar if you do reflect on things that, 1, are of relevance to you, but 2, maybe take you back to some experiences that you've had, 1 as a student, but also as a colleague of some people. Acknowledging the current situation, the challenges that I know presented. I'm tipping that you didn't join this webinar so that I could tell you what you already know. I could do this time and time again, but I know that you're not here today just to talk about current problems. The other thing is, I reckon that you've joined it because you're already looking forward. You've got one eye on the current situation. You've got one eye on today, but you've also got that other eye on the future. What's it actually going to look like when we return? You joined it, I think, because what you were seeing in the title was that notion of re-establishing boundaries and being the teacher that cares. And I think that's the thing that we all strive for. And again, I'm going to go back to that title slide of being fair and firm. So what I want you to do is just to reflect on your time, either 1 as a student or 2 when you're in the classroom if you're now a school leader. Think about the teacher that you felt was the greatest, the best teacher that you had. The teacher that when you were a student, you go, you know what, I haven't been in the classroom now for 20 years. I haven't been a student for 20 years, but I still remember this teacher because of the following qualities, because of the things that he or she did that makes them stick out more than others. And I think that goes the same with the colleagues too that we respect the most. It's the colleague that we look down into the office next door or the classroom next door and we go, they are a superstar. I just love them. They're the sort of person that I want to be like. But I guess when we start to think about what are the things that we admire about them, we can quickly flip that and we can think about it at the other side, which is what were the things that I didn't like so much about that teacher that also sticks out in my mind that I never want to go back to their class. Because at the other end of the spectrum, what we know is that we had teachers that we didn't always gel with throughout our time at school, and there are colleagues that we don't always gel with. So what are the sort of things that they bring to the table that are very different to that opposite end? And I'm sure the obvious answer that most people could throw at me right now is, oh, they were both fair and firm. Obviously, that goes with that title slide. But I think it's something a little bit deeper than that. I actually think it's about the relationship. And if you think about that person that you felt was the best teacher that you had, or the best colleague that you've ever worked with, it was something about what they were doing in the relationships they were able to build with their students. I guess for me, I go back to my time, and there's one that sticks out like no other, and it's a person I was fortunate enough to work with. And really, I'm saying that I'm lucky now because it wasn't in that time or in that moment that I actually realised how good a teacher she was until I actually went in there and started practicing, until I started doing things that, you know, at the cold face were giving me the challenges that teachers are facing on a daily basis. And I still reflect back on her practice now, and I still actually touch base with her and use her as a bit of a mentor. So I'm sure we've all got that person that we can remember. And I talked about the fact that it was all relationships. As teachers, we know the importance of relationships, but often what we do is we just go, yeah, relationships are relationships. Oh, we all see that's important. I think there are two types of relationships. And a lot of the work that we do is really trying to break apart what a good relationship looks like. So I know I've got a number of partner school 1 participants or teachers, and 2 partner school prins that are sitting in the room today. And really what we're talking about here is that notion of a blind builder versus a lever puller. So when I talk about a blind builder, what I'm talking about is that person that builds that warm, fuzzy relationship. The relationship where, you know, we're a little bit friendly with the students, where anything sort of goes, where it's a bit of a pat on the back and shit'll be all right. What we want to do is we want to really make sure that that's a relationship that we're aware of, but we don't build in schools. The ideal relationship, the relationship that we aim for, is what we call the lever puller. And when I talk about the lever puller, what I'm talking about is a relationship that's built on high support and high accountability. It's got high expectations that are built around it. So why we call it a lever puller is actually allows us to pull that lever for learning, for us to be able to teach adequately. And I think that's something we all strive to be able to do. And also to have that strong classroom culture and that strong learning environment. You know, I was sort of doing a little bit of research, obviously with a little bit of extra time through our hands there. And I think, you know, for me, it sort of comes back, I've started to get a bit of clarity on this notion that it's not about the right rules that make a classroom a great place for students. It's actually about the right relationship and expectations. And I think sometimes we do focus a little bit too heavy on rules. But if we can take a step back from that and go, it's actually about the personal connections. And that word connections being something that's been a common thread through all of our webinars. I'm sure that you'll start to go, yeah, it is about that. And that's the sort of thing that good teachers do well. So if we sort of unpack that a little bit more, and while we still have that teacher in mind, our greatest teacher, the person that we connected well with, the colleague, whoever it may be, we talk about relationships being overarching, but let's drill down a little bit into what type of relationship that is. And we've sort of started to talk about that lever puller. And I'm sure that we'd all make that same agreement that that person we did have in mind, they had qualities that lever puller explanation was that Di just talked about. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just pop a couple of things in the chat box there. Just talk about, for me, let's share this across the room. What was the number one quality that that person you had in mind possessed that made you think they were the great teacher? Just pop it in the chat box there. I'll just give you a minute there just to make a couple of comments. I'll also have a drink. What is it that stood out for you about them? Yeah, compassion. You're right. Kind but firm. Good, Kathy. Yes. Passion. That's a good one, James. I think that's so important, isn't it? Integrity. Yeah, generally care. Really, yeah. Listen deeply and respond. Yeah. Yeah, great. Look, loving the suggestions. And I think if we were now to do, you know, a second round of this and go, is there anything that we don't agree with from the people that have posted prior to us? No one would be able to pick something out because they're all the qualities that we want to see in a relationship that makes an effective connection. So really, when we sort of talk about that awesome teacher that we've talked about, or that awesome teacher that you've just listed there, and I think it was Kathy that actually made mention to it, They were both firm and fair, and now we're sort of ticking into that title slide of where we sort of started. I guess in planning for today, planning for this webinar, I thought, what does firm and fair actually look like? What is it that for me is that balance where I've got to have both? And for me, it's sort of a bit like bacon and eggs. And when I talk about bacon and eggs, I'm not someone that can have bacon by itself or eggs by themselves. I need to have that combination, and I need it to be good. And when I'm thinking about bacon, what I'm thinking about is that sort of crispy, salty, well cooked, nearly to the point of being burned. And those beautiful light eggs, I like the yolk. I like to be able to cut into my eggs and just know that the yolk's going to spill everywhere. And when I put that combination together, for me, that's the perfect part of having an enjoyable breakfast with the family. For you, it might be something a little bit different. I think everyone's got their own perfect combo. If I was to sort of go, what are the things that you can have, but you need something to sit right beside them? And I know Adam, if Adam had the chance to sort of be presenting today or to be talking about this, for him, it's something along the lines of chips and gravy, the warm gooey gravy along with the chips. And for him, that's the sort of work that it fits alongside. And for everyone else, I think you've got your own thing. I was talking to my wife about this prior to coming into this today, and for her, it's around the quince paste and blue cheese. I'm not a fan of blue cheese, but that's sort of where she feels it's that perfect combination. Either way, we talk about the balance of being what's right to make that taste sensation. So if I was to jump into the best way to get to this firm and fair balance, what I want you to know is where does it come from, or what sits behind this work? And it's the restorative practice framework. At Real Schools and the work that we do, the framework or the methodology that we use to help strengthen our school communities is restorative practices. Now, as you're picking up from earlier comments that have been made in this webinar and any other earlier webinars that you've seen, for us, relationships are at the absolute centre of all of our work. And I don't think I've met too many teachers in my time, and certainly none that I was working with, that would say, Simon, relationships aren't important. Everyone values relationships. But what actually happens is, I don't think there's a really explicit or clear understanding of what makes an effective relationship. So it's that restorative framework for how we can create that relationship and how we can build that strong school community. Because just by trying, just by doing what we think is right and being inconsistent, that's what leads us to that sort of, I guess, difference across our school community. So it's providing that common framework. And for us, it's Real Schools, us at Real Schools, the work that we do is around restorative practices. Now that we've sort of got that overarching theory, the work that we're going to unpack today is around the operating domains or the social discipline window. This is a key part of a restorative approach. Now, as you can see on a quadrant model, and I'm sure that everyone's seen these quadrant models before, and if I was to say, where do you want to be in a quadrant? Everyone would know that we go, right, I need to be sort of in that top quadrant, that top right part there. That's the part, yep, okay, we get that. But the reality is we're not always going to be there. What I want to draw your attention to at this point is the two axes, the firmness and the fairness. And what we've got there on one axis is firm, and on the other, running down the bottom, is fair. Now, when I talk about firm, what I'm also talking about is challenge. When I talk about fair, what I'm also talking about is support. So this isn't just applicable to student discipline. I think this is probably one of the myths that would go alongside this. What we're talking about here is students that misbehave, when a student does the wrong thing, when we have a discipline issue that we have to deal with. It's actually also about setting expectations for learning. So for creating high quality learning environments within our classroom and the ability to be able to look at our practice and say, is there a way that I can find what the perfect combination of firmness and fairness is when I'm delivering, when I'm supporting, when I'm working with, whatever it may be in my current role. And I say delivering in the manner that I think as leaders, we've sort of got to facilitate some of this work as well. So I guess probably before we sort of jump too far in, finding that firm and fair balance, finding the right balance, for me, the bacon and eggs, I reckon it's really disrespectful to students to give them work, especially an assessment task that is too hard. And I think that's a common theory that most teachers would share, that we know that, with a differentiated approach to learning, with targeting individual needs, we know that it's unfair and it's disrespectful to give a student a task that is above what their standard is or what their ability is. But I also think that something that we underestimate sometimes is that it is equally disrespectful to give students work or an assessment task that is too easy. That we don't probably spend enough time talking about this. And I think, again, that's when it comes back to making sure that it's that firm and fair, or that challenge and support is the right balance. The other thing about this is that when we find that it does relate directly to behaviour, when kids misbehave, generally there's a reason behind that. And sometimes it's because their skills don't meet our expectations. So again, it helps us with that really clear direction of what we're trying to achieve within our classrooms. What we're going to do is we're going to unpack each of the 4 quadrants. We're going to have a talk about what sits in each box, and then we're going to get a bit of a look at where and how we can find the right balance for, 1, our own personal practice, but 2, the people who we work with. So when we've got a situation that we have high on the firm and low on the fair, what we're actually doing there is we're doing to the students. So when we're doing to the students, what that looks like is we are quite punitive, we're authoritarian, and at times we can stigmatise. Now, when we're in this box, when we're in the to box, high on the firm and low on the fair, what actually happens is that we generally cast our mind back to our time that we're in school. And as adults who are on this webinar today, who have all been through and exposed to a school system from about the age of 4, this is generally the approach that we are familiar with when we attended school. We were all on the receiving end of a 2 model, which was generally high firm and low fair. It was quite punitive. And really, what was it focused on? It was focused on rules and consequences. And generally speaking, we were trying to apply those consequences immediately. So as you can sort of see, and I think this picture sort of tells a story of what it looked like in the modern world, as opposed to maybe when we were at school, that it's about a position of authority. It's about classroom architecture where we're out the front and we're doing to the students. You can see there that obviously a bit of an exaggeration with the megaphone and the hands over the ears, but really, if we were to think back to our classroom experiences, this is the model that we become familiar with, and this was education done to us. What we're doing in this model is we're sort of saying that desired behaviour is going to be encouraged by extrinsic rewards. And that's about, I'm going to dangle a carrot in front of you, and if you can do the right thing, you'll get the reward. But what we say about undesirable behaviour, it's really about discouraging by punishment. So that's the stick. If you behave like this, this will be the direct result of that behaviour. Now, the problem with this is it's really difficult to maintain the expectation. What generally happens is that when we work in that 2 box, we're likely to promote things like compliance on a good day, that is. Kids will sit there and they'll do the right thing, maybe out of fear, 2 out of boredom. But what could happen is that quite often, and more so as we get into a 2 model, we'll start to see rebellion. Kids will actually start to kick back and to say, no, hang on a second, this isn't working. And what that's built out of is generally one of 2 things, either fear and anger. Now, I go back to when I started teaching, and my time was probably spent what I thought was the right model to do, which was in the 2 box. And again, that's because I didn't know any different. So it's not about judgment. It's not about saying you were wrong when you were in that box. We look back on our own practice, and I've spent lots and lots of time in all boxes. But really, the 2 box for me was probably where I started a lot of my teaching. Today, even, I'm probably working more so from the 2 box in today's webinar. You know, there's not huge opportunity for interaction for you to do things in a different way. So I'm actually standing here and delivering at you. Really, there are times when this is needed, and generally speaking, it's when students raise safety issues within our classroom that maybe we have to provide an element of protection for. So perfect example is if a student picked up a chair, was over the top of another student ready to hit them over the head, what I'd be doing there is I'd need to go to the student and yell at the top of my voice, put that down, whatever it may be. So there's opportunities that do present the times when we have to do to the students. All right. Second box, which is when we are low on the firm and low on the fair. So low on the firm and low on the fair. In this box, we're sort of not doing much at all. When do we go there? before we talk about when we go there, when we're in the not box, and I think, again, this picture probably tells the story, a little bit neglectful, we're indifferent and we're passive. When we go there is generally on a Friday afternoon. Good teachers go there on a Friday afternoon, week 8, term 3, and they might fall into the not box. Unfortunately, some teachers spend more time there than they should. What happens is when we're in the not box, when we're low on the firm and when we're low on the fair, there's that element of absence. So that might be a physical absence, it might be mental absence, or it might be a sort of emotional absence. So it's the person or the teacher that's got a high number of days out of the classroom. It's got a teacher that maybe, photocopies the worksheets. and again, I talk about times that I've spent in the classroom and some of the people that I've worked with. It's about photocopying worksheets, handouts, sitting at the desk and saying, there you go, now go and do your work. I'm not really doing much in terms of facilitating good high-level learning. It might be about the textbook, the teacher that opens the textbook and goes, right, let's work from, page 55, right-hand side today, and off we go. And then they go and sit themselves back down at the front of the desk. So the not box isn't doing totally nothing, but it also includes when we just have that absence of quality that goes alongside it. What generally happens here is that we've got very little rules and expectations. And what that's likely to promote is generally a sense of hopelessness and maybe uncertainty for the students, especially for our students that want to learn and want to achieve, which is most kids when we put the right parameters around them. It is okay that at times we do slip into the not box. And as I said earlier, if it's late in the term, week 8, Friday afternoon, and you are just spent and so have your students, it's okay to take a step back and go, right, we just need to recharge the bats here today because next week we are firing straight back into it. What I used to say to the staff that I worked with, it's okay to go to the not box, but do not spend significant amount of time there. As quick as you get there, you need to get out of there and get back into another box. All right, 4. So when we're now moving to that box of 4, what we're talking about here is high on the fair and low on the firm. So high fair, low firm. I'm just going to have another quick drink. Excuse me for a second. Just while we do that, I'll just have a bit of a chat there. A look on the chat box, and I see there's a couple of posts from Adam and Amy. They'll be posting about upcoming opportunities. So if you're keen to jump into an upcoming webinar, click on the link there. Excuse me. Okay, and we'll fire back into it. So we're talking about the 4 box. When I talk about the 4 box, what I'm talking about there is high fair and low firm. Again, when we're sort of in this box there, what happens is that we may have limited expectations. Or the other side of that is sometimes the expectations change. So for kids, they seem to be in charge when we operate in this box. It seems to be that our students are actually driving the agenda and driving the learning, and they're making the decisions, what we're going to do and when. So I think the mistake that sometimes people make when they go to the 4 box is that they are good people that are trying to do the right thing, and they're trying to get high levels of engagement. They're trying to get high levels of collaboration. And the way they do that is they give up too much of the responsibility. And they say to the students, right, let's negotiate everything. And what we know is that as young kids with underdeveloped brains that love to push the boundaries, they're always going to go for the lowest common denominator. They're going to go for the least amount of work. They're going to go for the stuff that suits them, that makes them feel comfortable. So what happens is when we're in this box, generally the type of kids that perform well in this box are those kids that love to pull down the expectation bar. They're the kids that just go, it's too hard. And we're like, okay, Monday morning, let's rule up our page. Let's put our date at the time. I can't rule up my page. Okay, I'll do it for you. And then what sometimes happens as the teacher is that we step in and we go, I'll just do it for you. Why do we do that? Because sometimes it's good teachers who are trying to do the right thing and trying to build quality relationships. And they think by doing that, the more work they can do for the student actually helps consolidate that type of relationship. And I see this too often with challenging students that are happy to push that expectation line, and some teachers, in the attempt to build a high quality relationship, start to do too much work for these students. And what actually happens is it it certainly it doesn't become effective in the long term. It might help for that 1 or 2 days. The teachers that work in this box, generally they're your best buddies. They're the teachers, and again, you know, sort of, I've seen this before, and I've certainly worked with people that we've had conversations with our kids. Oh, no, I get along well with that kid. You know, and they nearly cross that line into friendship. And it's a really blurred or grey line about building a high quality relationship and then building a relationship that's more targeted towards friendship. But teachers in that 4 box sometimes do that. What will happen here is that with no follow through, generally speaking, we hear lots of threats. If you don't do this, I'll do this, but never ever follow through on those threats. It is okay that at times we go to that 4 box, and generally speaking, the time that, if I cast my mind back to when I was in a school a couple of years ago, the time that I probably spent the 4 box most effectively, the time I spent the 4 box most effectively was on the back end of a traumatic event. So if we had a group of students who face significant trauma, either one, an individual student, or 2, a whole team of students or a whole cohort of students, and there was a couple that really stick out for me, what would happen is we would need to provide high levels of support for them, and we'd need to provide an opportunity to do things for them. And really from that, it's an ability to be able to build back into that firm box. And if I was to sort of talk about what does that look like, sometimes, you know, it's a bit of a throwaway line, but it's about when we do our shoelaces up for our grade 6 students. Really, what are we doing? We're a bit permissive, we're protective, and we're a little bit easy and undermanning. So now I've sort of touched on the 3 boxes, sort of working left and around to the bottom there. The 4th box, and the 4th box of the quadrant, the part that we want to be in is the with box. Now, when we're doing with our students, what we are is firm and fair. High on the firm and then high on the fair. And we're sitting in this box over here. Now, the thing is about the with box. What I love about this box here is that we are relational. We're authoritative and respectful. Notice that in the 2 box, I mentioned authoritarian, and in the with box, I've talked about authoritative. Authoritative is when we use our power through our practice. Authoritarian is when we actually use our power and we're standing and we're directing at the front. So what we want to do is we want to use that power and that responsibility through our practice. And we focus heavily on relationships, and we're really respectful. And it's when we're doing learning with the kids. So in some ways, I sort of talk about this box as being the sweet spot. We've got these norms, we've got expectations, we've got guidelines. And what we're seeing in our classroom is collaboration, and collaboration where we're actually part of that. Kids that are working in collaboration in this box, they're not working in competition against each other. We're going to talk a little bit about competition and collaboration a little bit later on. But as I said, we're part of that learning experience. So there's that breakdown of authority. The kids take responsibility, and it's safe for them to be able to do that. What happens in this box is it leads to consistency. Consistency in behaviour, consistency in effort, consistency in understanding. It's a word that we throw around so regularly in schools, but it's so hard to achieve. Desired behaviours. What happens here is desired behaviours are encouraged by intrinsic rewards. So it's that feeling of pride that I'm doing the right thing, and it's that feeling of pride that I've got a connection and I don't want to do the wrong thing. So it's about intrinsic rather than extrinsic. And what happens here is that undesirable behaviour, so students that do the wrong thing, generally speaking, is that they're going to respond to what is a simple tactic of effective statements, and their feelings words, throwing feelings words about how we feel about a situation. And this is when we're talking about our kids having a conscience, which is a really healthy thing to do. So when we're in that with box there, those undesirable behaviours aren't managed singly by punishments. I think the one thing that people sometimes like to talk about when we're talking about if we are relational and respectful, is it okay to have punishments? I think that for a really simple answer, I haven't got time to go into this today, it is, but it's actually about making sure that the consequence is meaningful, and it's more about repairing harm as opposed to what was the behaviour, what was the consequence. So it's really centred around the harm that was caused, and it's centred around the relationship that needs to be built. What happens is when we work in the with box, we end up promoting things like cooperation. I talked about collaboration, but it's also about responsibility. Kids taking responsibility for their own learning. And this is where they start to display the empathy and the trust and the connection that makes that strong relational culture in our classrooms, which then allows us to leverage that for high quality learning. So there's a bit of a snapshot of each of the four windows broken down. This is coming back now to that reflection part that I sort of touched on earlier. What I want you to do is I just want you to think about your own practice. And I know a couple of people who are sitting in the room here have had the chance to be able to just do this little activity. For me, I do this quite regularly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 20 points. And I want you to allocate the points to each of the box, because I want to make it really clear. We can't, although the with box is perfect, the high firm, high fair, we can't spend our whole time in that with box. We are going to move between the other boxes. And for me, generally speaking, one, when I was in the classroom, but even now with my current practice now, if I move out of the with box, what I'll generally move towards is the to box. That's probably my next go-to box. What I try to do is limit the amount of times that I'm high on the firm and low on the fair in the to box and try and spend more time in the with. But I definitely go back to my time in the teaching, especially in some of those more graduate years, and I spent a fair bit of time in the for box trying to build those relationships. And there were times when I did visit that not box. So with your 20 points, what I want you to do is just to quickly allocate them going around in the C shape from the with, to, not, and for on your current practice. So for me, I'm going to sort of go, right, I'm about an 11, 4, 2, 3. So 11 with the with, 2 with the 2, 4 with the 2, 2 with the not, and 3. I just want you to spend 20 seconds thinking on your own practice and probably trying to break down where you spend your time practicing. If you're happy, you can post there in the chat room. I'm happy for people to share this. I think it's important when we do share, but I'm not going to push back on you to make sure that happens before I go to the next slide. Because now what I want you to do, and I'm going to sort of trust that you've been able to do, hey, Annette, thank you. Yeah, 12, 4, 2, 2. Awesome. The challenge doesn't need to be making significant change straight away. The challenge for me needs to be making a small change when we return to the classroom. And what I'm going to say is that small change needs to be, where am I going to pick 1 point from? The 2, the not, and the 4, and how am I going to add that to the with box? So if I can improve my practice when our students return, then the way I'm going to do that is by doing less of the 4 and a little bit more of the with. And they're the tiny steps that we need to take between now and our students returning, and then from our students returning to the end of the year, whatever period of time that may be, to make sure that we keep re-establishing that high firm, high fair approach. I think the other really key thing, and while we're talking about reflection, I reckon reflection on practice in schools has increased and improved significantly. That now we've got more reflective practice than we've sort of ever had before. We've got learning walks, peer observations. But what I don't think we do is I don't think we revisit this frequently. I don't think we have a common frame to be able to do it. So hopefully the operating domains will helpfully allow you to find that nice balance between firmness and fairness and be able to reflect on that, either one, chunking down your lesson, so little chunk by little chunk. If you're a secondary teacher, it might be lesson by lesson, or it could be as simple as activity by activity. Because I think throughout the course of a day, there are times when we move in all 4 boxes, and there are times that we know, the reality of a classroom is we know that some classes just are super smooth and this activity runs super great, but then there are other times that we think it's going to work well and it doesn't, and we often fall into different boxes here. So it's a good way of being able to reflect on your practice. I also reckon that this is good for parents. And, I take my own family and I use this in terms of the way that I parent and just reflecting on my parenting skills and how I work with my own students. And again, I don't think it's a conversation that can be ignored with some of your parents, that we know those helicopter parents that love to do the 4. They love to be high on the fair and low on the firm. And nearly, I think this is an increasing trend that we're seeing across our communities and across society, that we're seeing an increased number of parents starting to build friendships with their students as opposed to quality parental relationships with their students. And there's a whole range of reasons that that's happening. But I think it's a really useful tool or a useful way of saying to our parents, what does it actually look like to go into the with box? The other thing too is I use this quite often with students, to be able to say to students, you know, we've got a social group here. What does a good friend look like? And again, you can switch out some of those words around support and challenge from firm and fair. And what we want to do is talk about what do good friends look like? What's a friend that does for their friends? What's a friend that does to their friends? And I think we've all got those sort of friendship groups where we see dominating personalities and we see social loafers, and we sometimes wonder, how do we approach that? How do we have those conversations? So again, it's about providing that opportunity for them to move into that box. So just quickly on the rules and expectations, because I think this fits in really well to that first comment about re-establishing that firmness and fairness and re-establishing the boundaries. When I talk about rules, what I'm talking about probably is lists of things that we should do. Now, I've got that picture up there because in the game of AFL, like in any other sport, we need rules. And rules are required in games. But the thing is, and you would see this in the AFL, and for anyone, obviously not this season, but for anyone that follows a little bit of AFL, you would have seen this last season. What's starting to happen is that people are complaining the game's getting over-umpired. And every time we have a little misdemeanor, what happens is that we create a new rule for that. Now, I think if we apply that to the school setting, again, what we start to see is that kids look for the loopholes. I've got to take the current situation now, and it actually gets me a little bit frustrated some nights when I watch the TV at the moment. And, you know, we've come out with these rules about what we can and can't do around social distancing. And what I'm seeing is people looking for loopholes. Oh, but why can't I do this? And if they can do this, then they can do that. The problem is that when we sort of create those rules, sometimes they can be counterproductive around relationships. When we talk about expectations are about communicating our desired behaviour, and it's from a positive perspective. So what actually happens here, it gives us the ability to focus on values, and it gives a chance for us to strengthen relationships and offset negative behaviour. And I think if we can take something out of, I guess what one I've seen over the course of the last few weeks in the media, that the expectation is that you stay at home. The expectation is that you social distance. Okay, there is a bit of an expectation around rules as that, but when we start to talk the rules, that's when people start to look for the loopholes. And the reality is behaviour is not black and white. So the next time that we sort of revisit student management, student engagement in our school, in our, I guess even in our own classroom, I'm going to encourage us to strongly move towards the expectations as opposed to the rules. All right, what I've got is just 3 tips for us to finish to get that balance right. Number 1 is that we don't know how the kids are feeling at the moment, or we might know, but we don't truly know how they will be. So what I'm going to say is you need an opportunity. When your students return to the classroom, when we're talking about re-establishing those boundaries, what I'm going to say is use a way or a method of being able to get students to talk about and reflect on, 1, the experience, and 2, how they're feeling, so you know that. Next week, I'll be running a session on response circles. So again, that might just provide a couple of little tips of how you can create that type of environment in your class where you can talk about how people are feeling and that reflection. The biggest risk I think that sits here is that we feel that we're going to be behind. When we return to the classroom and when we start to re-establish those boundaries, what we're going to feel is that we need to catch up, that we've lost a term of learning, that we've lost 10 weeks of this or whatever else it may be. What I'm going to say there is that we need to just slow down and say we need to make sure that our kids are emotionally set and ready to go before we worry too much about pushing forward. Second one is around be explicit. We talked about re-establishing the boundaries obviously throughout today, but what I think is really important to remember is that our kids know what the boundaries are. They know what the routines are. They've had 10 weeks of working in our classrooms. So all we might need to do is just go back to the start, but we might be able to fast track through those expectations and not spend the same amount of time. But I think it is really important that we do go back and spend the time doing that. And the third one is relationship for work later. And again, I'll come back to that key message from the Real Schools stuff that we've been doing, is the webinar, connection first, content second. And you know, this is a great starting point, 1, when our students return to the classroom, but I do think this is probably the key to now. And if we were to reflect just quickly on looking at all of the different things that are coming in from all the different angles at the moment, reflecting on the type of relationships we've got going on, the type of work that we're expected to do, I'm just going to sort of keep encouraging you to say, right, keep one eye on today and the other eye on tomorrow. The stronger the connection that you and your colleagues can maintain now, the easier I think it's going to be to reestablish the boundaries when we return to normality. So if nothing else, over the course of school shutdown, whatever number of weeks that's going to be, if we can focus on that connection as being a priority, when we come back to talking about firmness and fairness and establishing boundaries within our classroom, if the relationship hasn't been damaged or an absence hasn't allowed us to drift apart, I think that we're going to be a far more effective in the work that we do. All right, just as we sort of move on Monday, Amy will be back, and I think through today, you would have seen a couple of links there in the chat room. Amy will be back for a webinar on student anxiety. So again, just another great opportunity to unpack some of the challenges that kids are facing at the moment and how we can best support them. She's been running some awesome webinars, so make sure that if you can get that out to your staff, that would be great. And probably just the last thing from me, a bit of a shout out to Amy and the RSA, the Real Schools Academy, that will be coming your way. But before I do leave you, I just want to sort of say, at any stage, feel free to reach out. Feel free to send me an email, give me a call. Sometimes it's for the silliest of questions that you may think, but it's so important just to bounce that off someone else. And I want to make sure that that offer sits there. To everyone, thank you. Enjoy your Easter. I really appreciate you giving up the time to come in today, and I hope you managed to get something out of it. The slide deck will come your way over the course of the next 48 hours, maybe by Monday. Take the time to enjoy the family and slow down for a few days, and I look forward to catching up with you next week. Thank you. I'm just going to check the Zoom chat room to make sure I haven't missed anything. Good on you, Kathy. Thanks. Doesn't look like there are too many questions there. So look, appreciate all the kind words. Have a great day. I'm now going to stop this broadcast once I can get that back.